Hello and welcome back to the virtual sponsorship series. Today we have the 5th edition of the series where we will be going over the first half of Chapter 2, There is a Solution. If you haven't seen the previous videos leading up to this point, check those out now. I've also started to upload a series of speaker tapes. Look out for the next addition to this series on Saturday night, March 17th. And so without further ado, let's get right into the text. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. We are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers of a great liner, the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. So in this paragraph, they're talking about the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, the meetings. And this is very true. There's so many people of so many different backgrounds that you'll come across in AA. People that you would never have met in your active alcoholism. And although I will definitely admit that all meetings are not created equal, when you find one that you really fit in, it can become the highlight of your week. It's a place where you can go with like-minded individuals and just be yourself. And the joy that they're talking about here from having escaped common peril, that being the death that alcoholism will eventually bring to anybody who does not find some form of recovery, is a way that we can all connect and relate to each other in good spirits. But like the ship that they make this comparison with, of people who escaped a shipwreck, they go their own way and eventually the joy subsides and their life picks back up. And it's not so with us, because there's something even more powerful which binds us. And I'm assuming here that they are talking about God. But not only that, there is the threat of alcohol that binds us together. For without each other, we would not be able to stay away from alcohol very long. Also very helpful is the constant reminder of the fact that this miracle has happened in our life by witnessing it in other people that come after us. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out in which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. So in the previous paragraph, we talked about how great the meetings are, and that's the truth. However, they're making a clear distinction here between the meetings and the solution. The meetings are a place where like-minded individuals with a similar problem can go to share the solution. The solution is contained in the book, into the big books of Alcoholics Anonymous. The solution is the 12 steps. This is very important because you hear things all the time like meetings makers make it. And according to this, that may not necessarily be the case. For a long time, I sat in the fellowship, I sat in the meetings and felt like an outsider looking in. I didn't quite understand what everybody was talking about, and I thought if I hung around for long enough, maybe eventually some of this good stuff would rub off on me, but it never happened. It wasn't until I got in the book with a sponsor and went through the 12 steps that all of this started to make sense and I started to feel a part of. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it an illness, involved those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him and no one is angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness, for with it there goes annihilation of all the things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. This is a powerful statement right here, because not only is alcoholism and addiction a disease that affects the mind, body, and soul of the individual who has it, but it is also a social and a family disease. It's as if the person affected by alcoholism is like a tornado that goes through life, destroying everything in its path. And oftentimes, the loved ones of the alcoholic suffer just as much as the alcoholic themselves. It's a small wonder that in periods of time where I was locked up, whether it be in a jail or an institution, that the lives of the people that surrounded me seemingly got better in my absence. That was a very hard pill for me to swallow. People's lives were better when I wasn't in it. We hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or who may be affected. There are many. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. Very rarely are alcoholics dumb people. We have some foresight, and we understand that if we talk openly about our drinking to somebody like a psychiatrist or our family members, it's going to cause us problems in the long run. We can't show them our hand and risk them having a better opportunity to get in the way of our next drink in the future. Even worse still, oftentimes these people don't truly understand what it is that we're going through. They don't understand the subtle insanity that precedes a relapse or another debacle. And so their conjecture to us, their trying to help us just kind of comes off like nagging, and it goes in one ear and out the other. However, another alcoholic approaches us who has the problem under control, they can usually win us over relatively quickly with a few shared war stories. After talking with somebody for a short period of time, it's very easy to see that they know their business about this drinking and this drugging. If you were to go to any rehab, you would see this happening there. Complete strangers become friends relatively quickly after sitting around in the common areas and talking about the stories of the past. As a person in recovery, this is quite the concept, that our dark past doesn't have to bear down on us like a suffocating weight. And in fact, it can be used as a tool to help somebody else and turn their life around and lift them up into a life better than anything they could have ever hoped for. That the man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with the real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are the conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. This is a very important paragraph for any of you who are preparing to start sponsoring other people. It's very easy to forget that, but for the grace of God, there go I. We cannot have this spiritual ego or this holier than thou attitude, and we shouldn't be preachy and too judgmental. It's a great relief for the newcomer to hear that the only thing required of getting this solution freely given to them is to eventually pass it on down the line. There are no fees or favors that are acquired in this process. And it's because of this complete lack of monetary motive that one can get to trust somebody. That, I think, is one of the hardest things with therapists and psychiatrists. They give us great advice that could be totally useful, but then at the end of the session, they have their hand out. $250, please. And you can't help but think that they didn't even want to hear you say what you had to say. That if it wasn't for the fact that you were paying them more than you could afford, most likely, they wouldn't have had the time of day for you. None of us make a sole vocation of this work, nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. We feel that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. All of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we are going to describe. A few are fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all their time to the work. I wish I read this paragraph a little bit closer when I first got sober, because I think that I had this idea in my head that if I were to sponsor enough people and do enough work in AA, I might never have to feel a bad feeling again for the rest of my life. And so I attempted to use AA just like I was using alcohol to numb feelings and try to control my life. But it says right here that going above and beyond and doing AA excessively doesn't necessarily increase its effectiveness. It also says that elimination of drinking is but a beginning. We must apply the principles that we're learning in this program in all the affairs of our life. If we keep going on the way we are going, there is little doubt that much good will result. But the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. Those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by, hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day. Many could recover if they had the opportunity we have enjoyed. How shall then we present that which has been so freely given us? When we read the excerpt from How It Works at the beginning of every meeting, we read the line, "Half measures avail us nothing." That statement is true. However, it's not true in the sense that I thought it was when I first heard it. You see, half measures will avail you half. The problem with that is half is not enough. If you stop drinking and drugging, your life will most surely get better no matter what you do. Not waking up hungover and withdrawal, not waking up in a jail cell and doing crazy, absurd things while intoxicated is sure to make your life better. Financially, you'll start to recover if you're not spending all your money on your substances. And slowly but surely, your life will improve. But the problem is that's only one half of the deal. The other half is we do not have the ability to enjoy the life that we have been given as a result of our sobriety. And without the ability to be grateful and enjoy this life that has been given us, we will ultimately lose it. Therefore, we end up with nothing. And then it goes on to say that close by hundreds of people are dropping into oblivion every night, out at the bars and the clubs, drinking and suffering in silence. And so to be rewarded with this miracle of sobriety and then not pass it on, not be of service, is just selfish. And because of that, you're destined to not be able to hang on to it. We have concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it. We shall bring to task our combined experience and knowledge. This should suggest a useful program for anyone concerned with a drinking problem. Of necessity, there will have to be discussion of matters medical, psychiatric, social, and religious. We are aware that these matters are, from their very nature, controversial. Nothing would please us so much as to write a book which we would contain no basis for contention or argument. We shall do our utmost to achieve that ideal. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints, and a respect for their opinions, are attitudes which will make us more useful to others. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. So this is really a design for living, and life being so complicated, they're attempting to bridge the gap between a lot of these controversial subjects, which in my opinion they do quite well. And then it goes on to say that constant thought of others is our only hope. As we proceed in this study of the Big Book, we will learn that the root of our problems is selfishness and self-centeredness. And so without service to other people, there's no way out of that. You cannot think your way out of selfishness, because that would involve you just sitting there and thinking about yourself, further perpetuating the problem. In that way, it's almost like a paradox. You may already have asked yourself, why is it that all of us became so very ill from drinking? Doubtless you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. If you are alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. We shall tell you what we have done. Before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points as we see them. So there's a bit of a controversy in AA. Some members will introduce themselves as a recovered alcoholic. Some people think this is inappropriate because it sets a tone that may confuse a newcomer into thinking that this person has overcome the allergy we have to alcohol and thus can drink successfully. Or even that they do not need a support group or maintenance of their spiritual condition to maintain their sobriety. However, the recovered alcoholic is making reference to this paragraph. We have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. And that's that cycle that we went over in the doctor's opinion. The cycle of fleeting thought, obsession, allergy, run, consequences, firm resolution, and round. Once we have overcome the mental obsession, thus shattering the cycle, we have recovered from a hopeless situation, provided the maintenance of our spiritual condition. So what do you need to do to break that hopeless cycle? Well, that's what this book was written for. How many times people have said to us, I can take it or leave it alone. Why can't he? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That fellow can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine? Lay off the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl, I should think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him that if he ever drank again it would kill him, but there he is, all lit up again. Now these are commonplace observations on drinkers which we hear all the time. Back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. We see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different from ours. So earlier when we talked about how the psychiatrist and the family members can't reach us, but the ex-problem drinker can, this is exactly why. All those observations that they listed off there that are based in ignorance, that come off like nagging, that is what we have heard for most of our lives. And it's that type of reasoning that these people have that make our minds close to them so severely. Words can only jog somebody's memory of a previous experience to bring knowing to some sort of a situation. And if somebody doesn't have an experience, you can try all the words in the world to make them understand what it is you're going through, but you will fail miserably. It would be like trying to explain color to somebody who had been born blind. Try as you might, you would probably fail. And even if they thought that they understood, you would be unsure whether they actually did. Moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate, although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. So these are the type of drinkers as far as the big book is concerned. So the moderate drinkers are the normies, as some people in recovery refer to them. These are the people that can go out and have a drink or two and then go home and return to their normal life. These are the people that frustrate us so, the ones that can order a drink with dinner and leave it half finished. What a waste. Then we have the hard drinker. These are the weekend warriors, the ones that go out and they drink, they get drunk, but they're not a 24/7 drinker or binge drinker. They like to partake every now and then, and it becomes a habit, but if a sufficient reason comes about to make them stop, they just stop. They don't need to go in and out of institutions and have the spiritual experience to overcome their drinking. I dated a girl that was in this category one time, and I found it very interesting. She had been partaking in a lot of drinking and cocaine, and she had made a terrible, terrible decision while intoxicated, which basically upended her whole life. And in the aftermath of these terrible consequences, she made a decision that she should not drink anymore, and then just stopped. I couldn't believe it. Because if you had asked me before she had just stopped like that, I would have probably said that she may have been alcoholic. She was definitely suspect in that. But that was not the case. She was able to just stop. And so this class of drinkers is very important to note, because sometimes they can end up in AA. You know, somebody who got a DWI and then got court ordered to AA, but wasn't a chronic alcoholic, could end up sticking around because he made some friends. And it's important to note that, because if that person stays sober for many years and they don't go through the steps and they don't sponsor people and they seemingly do it with their own willpower, they may not be in the same class as you. They may not be that chronic alcoholic. And so if you look at their experience as a way to justify you taking the same path, you could end up dead. But what about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. But at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. So for me, I found it very hard to control my drinking from day one. And if you listen to the speaker tape I posted, you can kind of hear that in my story a bit. my consequences started early, and it rapidly progressed to where I was completely out of control as a teenager. However, you'll hear plenty of people in AA with a different experience. It's a gradual progression, and you can kind of see that in Bill's story. Although he was a little bit abnormal early on, it progressed over the course of his life, and he crossed these hard lines in the sand until eventually he got to the point of no return. And the thing about the point of no return is, I think that the progressive type of alcoholic, if they had stopped their drinking before that hard line in the sand, before that point of no return, they probably could have stopped their drinking without having the need of a spiritual experience. The problem with that is we usually cross the point of no return when we're still having fun. And it isn't until we're miles past the point of no return that it turns on us and bears its fangs and sinks them into us when we realize, oh no, I must stop. But it's far, far too late. Here is the fellow who has been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. He is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. He is always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial. He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. He is often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor, but in that respect he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. He is the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around, yet early the next morning he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. As matters grow worse, he begins to use combination of high-powered sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work. Then comes the day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative which to taper off. Then he begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums. So here's their best description of the chronic alcoholic. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, we call him, right? It's the complete change in character that the substances bring about that is a great identifier. And the alcohol brings him to a very dark place, even though he might be very talented and smart when sober. And no matter how many promising opportunities the chronic alcoholic gets, he just can never bring himself out of this cycle of destruction that the alcohol brings out in him. Eventually, as he progresses and his behavior becomes more and more absurd, he approaches the point in which he needs to be locked away or eventually dies. And so this description, you can add things to it, you can take things away from it, but it's a good indicator. Like, if any of this stuff is sounding somewhat familiar to you, that you're probably in this third class of drinker, the chronic alcoholic. This is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic, as our behavior patterns vary, but this description should identify him roughly. Why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attendant suffering and humiliation, why is it he takes that one drink? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? What has become of the common sense and willpower that he still sometimes displays with respect to other matters? Now, in my opinion, we could attempt to answer this question with long winded explanations that only make partial sense. But in my mind, it's quite simply he's alcoholic. Perhaps there never will be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people. We are not sure why, once a certain point is reached, little can be done for him. We cannot answer the riddle. We know that while alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We are equally positive that once he takes any alcohol whatever into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mentally sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. So we still don't have a definitive answer on why an alcoholic person does the tragic things that he does. But in the 80 plus years since this has been written, science has come a long way, and I believe that they're getting relatively close to being able to explain this phenomenon relatively well. From what they currently understand, alcohol and drugs release dopamine within the brain, which is the brain's reward system. It brings about positive feelings. This system, this dopaminergic system, is located deep within the midbrain. And this system is ancient. It's been around for as long as organisms have had nervous systems on this planet. And it's essential for our survival. It makes eating pleasurable and sex pleasurable. This way we seek to do it, thus sustaining our life and procreating our future generations. If eating and procreating were miserable, painful experiences, we would probably avoid them at all cost, and our species would die out. Once alcoholism or addiction is fully established within the individual and in a way hijacks this system, it places its drugs and alcohol in the same category as other life-sustaining things such as food, water, oxygen, and sex. And thus, asking somebody to abstain from alcohol or their drug of choice would be like asking somebody to just stop eating for the rest of their lives. They may be able to hold off for a few days, some longer than others, but eventually hunger will take over their body and they will do anything that they could within their power to get something to eat. Even more interesting is the fact that the brain is very good at recognizing patterns. And so if there is a pattern of thinking that precedes the first drink, which it believes is so essential for survival, it will strengthen the neural pathways in which that thought will come about. So if a person tends to use or drink when they're at a severe emotional intensity, the brain can actually increase the size of the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that is responsible for regulating emotions, thus making the emotional reaction necessary to start the train of thought that leads to a drink or a drug extremely likely to happen over and over again. Another interesting study that has come out recently is they found that the best way to rewire your brain, for lack of better words, to undo some of the damage that these strengthened neural pathways do after years and years of repeating the same patterns of alcoholism and drug abuse, is by releasing 3 chemicals in the brain simultaneously, referred to as the holy trifecta: dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. And now there are various ways in which you can cause these 3 chemicals to be released simultaneously in the brain. But what they found in their studies was the most efficient way to do this is charity work. Doing something kind for another human being and the connection with that human being that follows apparently makes these chemicals be released in large amounts, thus beginning a process of healing within the brain. That is amazing. It's almost as if science is just starting to prove what AA has been saying all along. By no means is this a full picture of why we are the way that we are. However, the progress they have made in this area gives me great hope for the future. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of an alcoholic centers in his mind, rather than in his body. If you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic's bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of a man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so that he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. So what they're referring to here is a twofold problem. We have an allergy of the body which cannot process alcohol. It's a neurological phenomenon in which once we take a drink, we develop the phenomenon of craving, and it is impossible for us to control the amount we take in. Along with that, once we abstain from alcohol temporarily, we have a mental obsession to go back to the drink. So we have an inability to stay stopped. As far as the allergy is concerned, that will be with us forever. And so there's nothing we can do to get rid of that. If it was just the allergy, we would get educated that if we were allergic and if we took one drink, we wouldn't be able to stop, and then we would just stop and life would be good. But that's not the case for us. Now, if we didn't have the allergy and we only had the obsession, we would not be able to stop drinking, but at least when we screwed up, we wouldn't be overcome by an impossible to control desire to continue drinking until the bitter end. Thus, our slips would not be so devastating. But it's the combination of these two factors of alcoholism that really puts us between the rock and the hard place. And so, having said that the allergy is not going anywhere, the only hope lies with overcoming the mental obsession that stops us from being able to remain abstinent. And that's exactly what the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous aims to do. Then it goes on to talk about some of the excuses we try to make for the way we drink, but none of them really make sense in the light of how bad our life really is. And it's not until we finally get desperate enough that we stop trying to make these excuses and start to take accountability for the way our life has become that we can finally take steps towards changing and improving our lives. So I think that's a good spot to stop. Next video, we'll finish up this chapter. As always, I had a great time making this video and learned a lot. I hope you did too. And feel free to comment with any suggestions for content and other things that I could do to help your recovery. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for listening. God bless.